My imminent response to a question about, especially number 1 and 3, you had about the social, the global difference between rich and poor, and the climate discussion. I think that as Christians and as church, we have to leave that. It's too big an issue for churches to engage in, and I don't believe that we have the power to change these things anyway. So I don't see this as a challenge that we as church is going to take up.
But what do others think? Do you agree with him?
No.
Well, I think there are things we can do, even on a small scale, like we have this Green Church project where, as a church, you decide that the CO2 emission from this church should be reduced as much as possible. It may not be very effective in terms of the global problem, but at least it's a way of being conscious and showing attention to it. Concerning the other one about the market, I find that a complex question, and I've been struggling with understanding really the mechanisms of the market in terms of, you referred to Adam Smith, and he has this idea of the invisible hand. That if you're rich, if you spend your money, it's going to be somehow for the good of the poor, or at least the less privileged people. And it seems that in some contexts the market is able to create miracles. And I'm not. I think of like microfinance, the idea of microfinance, which seems to be built on some kind of market thinking, as I understand it. What to do about this from a Christian ethical point of view? How to, as it were, assess the miracles of the market, apart from all the other side effects of the market?
Yeah. So, what is the question that you're putting?
My question concerning the marketing is how can you reflect on kind of the idea of the invisible hand, which is kind of the core of liberalism, and say how as Christian people we should understand the market in a nuanced way.
Yes, all these writers are quoted selectively, so people only know from Adam Smith's writings his phrase, the invisible hand, and that phrase he only mentions about 3 times, I think, in a book of about 600 pages. But somehow Adam Smith has been identified with that. But Adam Smith also says many things that today would discomfort capitalists. For example, he talks about how new industries, fledgling industries, need to be protected by the state from unfair competition. So it's only when industries have grown to a certain stage of maturity that you can have free trade. Otherwise, competition is unfair. He also was against stock companies, the promoting of speculation, which is just taken for granted in today's capitalist economies. He also had some very critical things to say about businessmen, and said, you don't trust business people because they are not concerned about the common good. They're only concerned about making monopolies, profits. That's all that drives them. Whereas today, many governments, many states are actually owned by huge business interests and are manipulated by powerful business organizations. And often was inspired about. So Adam Smith is quoted selectively to support certain aspects of a market economy, and the other things that he said that were more critical are ignored. That's the irony. So there is actually much in Adam Smith that we can accept, and also much that we say, well, he's a product like all of us are of our particular circumstances, our context, and he has to be read in context. He was not licensing greed, which is the way today people try to read Adam Smith. He was not saying, just be greedy, ruthless, forget about others, and in the end everything will work out. This invisible hand of divine providence will bring about the best kind of society. He was not saying that. There were others in his time who were saying that, but he distanced himself from that. He wrote another book called The Theory of Moral Sentiments, before he wrote The Wealth of Nations, where he talks about our natural human empathy and compassion for one another. Remember, Adam Smith was an Anglican priest, as well as a moral philosopher. So we can say perhaps he was a little naive, because he thought that our natural human empathy with each other, our feeling for those who are suffering, would automatically restrict our greedy economic behavior. That the rich would use their wealth to also support and care for the poor. He was naive. You know, he was influenced by deism. He didn't really have a strong doctrine of original sin. So, yeah. So, we must move away from this, either this blanket condemnation of markets or this blanket promotion of markets. I mean, look at your society. You have well-regulated markets. You have social welfare. You know, very different from Britain in the 1980s under Margaret Thatcher, or America today. You know, so there are different kinds of market economies. American capitalism is not the same as Danish capitalism or German capitalism. Look at Japanese capitalism, where until recently all Japanese workers were guaranteed lifelong security in work. Now that's being dismantled today, the way the current global economy is moving more and more towards the American model, sadly. So it is not an either or. It is not saying just, you know, leave the markets alone, they will work everything out fairly and correctly. Nor is it saying let's move to a socialist state. And what I find interesting that today, some of the greatest economists in the world, Nobel Prize winners like Amartya Sen, Joseph Stiglitz, they are now talking about the importance of addressing inequality, the importance of regulating markets. They are challenging the view of human beings that lies behind economic theory, especially in undergraduate economic textbooks. And I think now, where are the Christian economists? There are thousands of Christian economists in the world. Why have they not been saying what Joseph Stiglitz and Amartya Sen and others are saying today? And that's the problem. Why are young people in Denmark going on the streets to protest about climate change and global warming when there are these international summits in Copenhagen? Why can't every single member of our Christian churches join them? Why are we saying, oh, we as a church can't do anything, we are powerless? These young people who are not Christians don't think like that. They're going and they're influencing politicians. You're reading about the protests in Hong Kong. Who is leading that? It is a student union in the University of Hong Kong. And the student leader is a Christian, Joshua Wong. He's 17 years old. When he was a 15-year-old high school student, he challenged the Chinese government who came up with a new education curriculum. A 15-year-old high school student, he used social media to mobilize 250,000 people in Hong Kong to oppose the education bill, and the Chinese government withdrew it. Now that's the same guy who is part of the student committee who has been organizing the protests calling for freedom and democracy in Hong Kong. And you here sit here and tell me, oh, we can do it. We are powerless. I don't believe it. I think that's just cowardice. You are lazy.
I have often been thinking of, India has become a rich country. Why do they not do more for the poor people? Is that because it is mainly a Hinduist country and not a Christian country with Christian values? Why do you still have so many people?
But who is they? When you say who is they, why don't they do more? You're talking of 1 billion people, not Denmark with 5 million people, right? So if you say why doesn't the Indian government do more, that's a good question. Okay, because a lot of the politicians are corrupt, and a lot of Indian businessmen have political power, influence, they can corrupt the politicians. But India has a number of civil society organizations, some Hindu, some secular, some Christian, who are doing a lot of good work with the poor. They're the ones who are leading the social protest movements, challenging business companies that want to come and just take over land belonging to tribal peoples. There is a very strong and healthy civil society movement in India. So don't generalize about India. There are those Hindus who want to support the oppressive caste system, but there are many Christians who also practice caste in their churches. When it comes to choosing a marriage partner or giving a job, they are worse than the Hindus. And there are Hindus who are also challenging caste oppression. So when it comes to a population of 1 billion people, we must be careful not to generalize and make broad statements. India is a very complex society with a long history and 2,000 different language groups. Yeah, go on.
It's an interesting observation that it is different Christian groups that will tend to be concerned about certain aspects. And what concerns us will somehow show which group you are in. Are you an ecumenical or are you an evangelistic person? Your message is that to be concerned of it all, to join hands in the efforts to combat these problems so that we build bridges over the different Christian groupings.
Yes, very much. I mean, the day is long gone when we can think that we can just work within our own denomination or our own organization or our own church tradition. You know, it's long gone. I mean, I come back to Bonhoeffer's thing about looking at history, looking at what is happening around us, looking at every political issue from the perspective of those at the bottom. Now, to do that, if we are in a church, for example, that is not at the bottom, but is part of the social elite. And in Denmark, I guess, until very recently, I mean, the Lutheran Church and the state are one and the same almost, you know. And the church largely acts as a chaplain to the state. Very rarely do you find a prophetic critique of the state coming out of the Lutheran Church, because the Lutheran Church has social power, economic power. Today you have Pentecostal groups, you have Baptist, Free Church groups that also make up the church in Denmark. So Lutherans have to then also look at Danish reality from the perspective of Pentecostals and Baptists and Free Church people. And you also have in cities like Aarhus and Copenhagen and many others, Christians from all over the world. Many of them poor Christians, from Syria, from Iraq, from Afghanistan. So on any issue, whether it's the so-called war on terror or economic policy, global warming, you also need to listen to these other Christian voices. You know, we have to read the Bible with those who come from other church traditions, from Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox to Pentecostal to New African churches, because They will help us to see our blind areas, our blind spots, and all of us have blind spots.
Yes, I think there was one last question.
I completely disagree that we should not care about it as a church, and I think we should be deeply. I completely disagree with the position that we should not care about the unjust distribution of goods and everything. But what should we do? And that's, as you mentioned yourself, here in Denmark we have a social welfare system. So much of your critique is like it's not unwarranted, but it's easier to see it in the States or in England than here in Denmark. My question is, what do we do? Like, I think you're right that we are a little lazy and we are in the good comfort of our social welfare system, but could you, like, what are you doing in Sri Lanka? What are your church doing? Give us some examples of how are you addressing the issue of the unjust society we live in, and yeah.
Well, that's another lecture. I won't go there because it will take too much time. But let me just say, if you have benefited from a social welfare system that many people, Christians and non-Christians, have sacrificed their lives to bring about, and if you benefit, you say it's a good thing. Don't you want to see this same system extended worldwide?
Sure.
So then if you have in your churches Christian economists, Christian business people, Christian politicians, encourage them to get into these forums, national and international forums, the UN, and I mentioned yesterday joining with all these, Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, all these international bodies, and argue for something like a safety net for all the world's poor, a global minimum wage. There should be laws restricting what factories do in places like China or Vietnam. So if you have Danish companies going and outsourcing their work to those countries, they should also be looking at environmental conditions, safety conditions, the wages that people are paid, and you should be asking questions of those Danish companies. And in that way you can influence what is happening in China or Vietnam or Mongolia or whatever, just by being faithful in your local church context.
Thank you so much. And I think that what I hear in Jakob and maybe also others asking for is also how can we expand our imaginations. Switch to Danish, sorry now. At når vi tænker, så kan jeg selv tænke, hvad i verden kan vi gøre som lille mig eller lokal kirke, så er det fordi, jeg har brug for at udvide min forestillingsevne til, hvad en lille handling kan betyde, eller hvad der også kan gøres. Og det at få nogle eksempler fra Vinoth for eksempel, kunne det betyde sådan. Det er også derfor, vi skal have 2 cases eller historier igen i eftermiddag, som måske kan begynde at udvide vores forestillingsevne. Et andet hjælp er det her hæfte, som jeg kort nævnte i går, et passioneret folk, som i den engelske udgave hedder A Just People, altså et retfærdigt folk. Og her i det her materiale, der er der lagt forholdsvis meget vægt på social retfærdighed, netop fordi det måske er et sted, hvor vi har brug for at få udvidet den her forestillingsevne. Så her i der vil der være historier, der er øvelser til, hvordan man kan arbejde med det praktisk og reflektere over det og hjælpe hinanden til at begynde at forestille sig, hvad kunne jeg gøre, hvad kunne vi gøre som lokal kirke eller som organisation. Og det er et materiale, som vi har udgivet i forbindelse med det her kursus, og det er bygget op sådan, at man dels kan bruge det som grundlag for en studiegruppe, hvor man simpelthen kan gennemgå det, eller man kan holde et egentligt kursus. Og det er lidt ligesom, hvis I kender alfa-materiale, det vil sige, der står meget pædagogisk og meget grundigt til tider, at I kan gøre sådan, og I skal huske, når I mødes der, og huske at flippe over og tusch og alt det hele. Og så er der de spørgsmål, man kan stille undervejs, eller her bede folk om at tale 2 og 2 eller i grupper. Og der er også oplæg til hver samling. Forløbet består af en aktionsdag, som ligesom er hovedpunktet, og så 6 samlinger. Og til hver samling, der er der et oplæg, og hvis man er en mindre gruppe, så kan man simpelthen sætte sig ned og læse det op sammen. Og hvis man er lidt større, så kan man måske forberede at holde det som et oplæg, eller man kan holde sit eget oplæg ud fra det eksempel, der er givet her i. Så det jeg tænker, er et virkelig godt redskab til ret hurtigt og enkelt at kunne komme i gang med at arbejde videre med det her derhjemme, eller i jeres sammenhæng i en studiegruppe, eller som et egentligt kursus. Og det vi har tænkt at gøre, er, at vi på et tidspunkt forhåbentlig inden så længe vil holde, dels her i vest og også i øst, en inspirationsfyraftensmøde eller noget for dem, der er interesseret i at køre det her som kursus eller studiegruppe, hvor vi inviterer ind, og så kan man komme og få lidt inspiration til at snakke om, er det her noget, vi kan gøre, og hvordan kan vi lige gøre det rent praktisk, osv. Og det er lavet sådan, at egentlig er det bare lederne, der behøver at have det her. Så downloader man læringsarkene og printer ud til deltagerne. Og nu har I fået en gratis, den koster 50 kroner, det vil sige, det er også rørende billigt at køre det her. Hvis det er det. Ja. Så lige om lidt, så vil vi have en session, hvor at der er lejlighed til at stille spørgsmål og kommentarer til bidragyderne i dag.